Hey there, and welcome back to another My Hero Academia Season 6 review. And today we're going to be talking about the latest episode to drop, episode 10, The Ones Within Us, which follows up on the highly stressful cliffhanger of Bakugo getting impaled by Shigaraki as he tries to protect Deku. With Deku about to freak out and move up to an even higher tier of rage than he'd previously achieved after Gran Torino got smashed and Aizawa lost his leg to try and save his quirk from a deleter round. And I'll tell you what, this season's going hard. And it just keeps getting better and better with every single episode, even more twists and turns every minute. And so I was really excited coming into this episode. And on top of that, the preview for next episode promises even more awesomeness next week. So yeah, it's going to be good. But yeah, back to this episode. Before we begin, I do need to say that I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points and details, although I've probably forgotten a whole bunch of things as it has been a fair while since I actually read it, or at least read this arc. But for the purpose of these reviews, I prefer to approach things from an anime perspective, so that anime-only fans can watch along and join in too. And so yeah, with all that being said, let's jump into the episode. So we start off the episode with just another brief look at Bakugo getting impaled, saving Deku. And as he does so, he tells him not to try and win by himself. That he's not strong enough to go it alone against somebody as powerful as Shigaraki, because obviously, Shigaraki has a ton of quirks that can restore and regenerate him. Quirks that will allow him to fight on in various different ways, so Deku really doesn't have much of a chance. Eventually, even using his quirk isn't going to let him move his floppy noodle arms anymore. Bakugo then starts to fall and gets caught by Shoto, who's flying through the air using fire from his feet. And how strong is this kid? In one arm, he has his dad, who apparently weighs 118 kilograms. In one arm. And then the other arm is full on just holding up Bakugo by the leg. Yeah, the fire feet help him fly, but gravity still exists. This guy must have the strongest arms in the class right now. And all the while, Shigaraki is looking quite worse for wear, to say the least. And he's also having a bit of an internal crisis. Shigaraki wants to keep full control of his body, whereas All For One wants to actually win the battle, and thus keeps trying to force him into the passenger seat. And so I guess that's really just a bit of an explanation as to why they're just floating there doing nothing, when they really should be pressing the attack. Possessed Shigaraki then says that a lot of unnecessary blood was spilled today, which of course triggers Deku, as in his eyes, by saying that, they're lessening the sacrifice of everybody who died, of his friends and mentors who were badly wounded. And so he rages, he powers up again, and he smashes through a bunch of those Dark Claw tendrils and even bites through some. But this just gives Shigaraki a chance to grab him and try to steal his quirk, so pretty much blinded by his own rage, and activated Shigaraki for One's trap card. And then cue the spooky organ music as we arrive for a scene that, more than anything, felt like a cutscene leading into a boss fight for a video game. I love the All For One theme music. It's the most iconic soundtrack in the show, I reckon. And it makes him just feel like such a big deal. Even when he's just a baked potato in a straitjacket, he seems cool. Anyway, Deku and Shigaraki are in the Vestige realm, and Shigaraki's not all that happy about All For One trying to take charge, and is fighting him every step of the way. Even though All For One tells him that he would have straight up died from Endeavor's attack if he hadn't stepped in to help, or at least he would have died from the fall after the attack. And whilst they're having their struggle, Deku realizes that he's probably in deep shit and tries to move, only to find out he's unable to do that just yet, which means he can't fight. And so, it's a good thing he has his own Vestige friends to help him out, starting with Shimura. And my god, that woman is jacked. Moving on, we return to the waking world to catch up with Gigantomachia and his path of destruction. And yeah, he's still going, bulldozing through cities, so it's going to be a whole lot of dead civilians before this is all over. Regardless, he's probably getting close, as in the Jakku City suburbs, the heroes have relegated the evacuation efforts to the police and rescue teams, whilst the bulk of the heroes charge towards Gigantomachia's path to clear any other civilians away and try to slow him down. It's pretty much just a bunch of no-names who are prime candidates to be slaughtered by the big man, and then our second-tier heroes like Froppy, Ingenium, Uraraka, who are probably not going to be killed. A bunch of flying heroes like Nejire are told to go as messengers to tell the team fighting Shigaraki what's happening. And they're in turn joined by Ingenium, who goes against orders in order to try and find his classmates, particularly Shoto and Deku, as they're the ones that pulled him back during his battle with Hero Killer Stain. They saved him, taught him to be better, and so he wants to repay them. And honestly, it's always nice to see some Ida content. Dude felt like he was being built up as one of the core characters in those early days, only to drop off pretty majorly after the Stain arc. So it's nice to have him do these things as well. And speaking of which, we move back to Uraraka, who's with the main group of heroes and is running towards the danger, thinking about how everything's slowly and steadily going to shit further and further, ever since the attack on the USJ by Shigaraki, where they saw the first Nomu, and the League of Villains made their debut. And yeah, it's crazy to think that in story, that was all under a year ago. So much has happened to the kids in that time. Gonna need some severe therapy when all's said and done, I reckon. And then it's back to the realm of the Vestiges, where Shimura and All For One are getting to have their own little showdown. Shimura tells him that she hadn't expected to see him after he killed her, whilst All For One laughs, calling her incompetent and pitiful, trying his best to fire up Shigaraki, to get him angry by telling him that this is her, this is your grandmother, as after all, he hates his family with a passion, and a big part of his pain he would attribute to her. We then get a bit of an explanation from All For One as to how this is all happening, and it's basically explained that quirk factors have a form of consciousness embedded inside them. And I really liked that they bothered to explain this. It is fun, although on the other hand, I would also have just accepted them all being there regardless of if they bothered to tell me why. They could have just said that they're straight up magical ghosts, and I wouldn't have thought twice. After all, the main characters all have crazy superpowers. Very little is out of the realm of possibility to me in this story. Vestige ghosts? Yeah, that makes sense. But anyway, whilst this is all going down, Shigaraki continues to brood, thinking back about all the times he's heard of his grandmother. Gran Torino blamed him for tarnishing her memory, or when he and his sister found a photo of her in his dad's study, which led to him getting beaten and then killing his whole family. And yeah, All For One continues to ramble on about how his quirk and One For All let you talk to quirk Vestiges, while Shigaraki gets angrier and angrier at the world and declares that he hates his grandmother before he tries to kill everybody, only being held back by Shimura's Vestige powers. And he even tries to dust All For One, much to All For One's amusement as he now realizes that he is also a subject of Shigaraki's hate, being able to be inside his head and see how he thinks. And it's good that Shigaraki's at least realised that All For One is a monster that doesn't truly care about him. I guess that's a small consolation. Anyway, the original One For All then makes his appearance in the Vestige world to keep holding back Shigaraki and prevent the quirk being stolen, telling his brother that they've chosen to be with Deku, and so they're going to remain with Deku. Of course, this causes All For One to power up even more and take full control of Shigaraki for the time being, trying to force the One For All Vestiges into submission and steal the quirk for himself, taunting his brother about how Deku's weak, unable to protect his allies, and that he gave into his anger, and thus, he can no longer fight for himself in this realm. His allies have to do it for him. But One For All is a bit of a hype man for Deku, and talks about how they'll never leave him, and that he's a one-of-a-kind sort of person, a person obsessed with helping others. Which in turn gives Deku the strength to power through his anger and fight back, which causes a massive explosion of power as the quirk transfer fails. This of course launches both Deku and Shigaraki away, but after that intense and grueling battle, they're both pretty much finished off. Deku seems to pass out, whilst All For One whispers to Shigaraki that he needs to withdraw quite urgently, or he's going to risk dying. And this has really been such an epic battle. It's one of the best in the series for sure. And honestly, I quite like where they seem to have finished it up for now. Obviously, there's going to be a newer phase as even more characters turn up to keep fighting, but the pure Deku versus Shigaraki battle, that would have to be finished now, surely. Either way, it was pretty awesome. And then for the latter third of the episode, we head back to the Gigantomachia storyline. A storyline where the mission control dudes are freaking out, as the dude is bulldozing city after city, running at 100 kilometers per hour and killing anybody unlucky enough to be in his way. And on top of that, he's now only 10 minutes away from Jakku City, with most of our major heroes, Mirko, Endeavor, Aizawa, Deku, Bakugo, they're all pretty badly beat up. There's only a few left. So currently, looks like the big man's going to be able to pull a clean sweep of the board. Plus, he has a bunch of really powerful villains on his back as well. And speaking of which, the aforementioned villains have a little bit of dialogue that sets up the next phase of battles. Darby is eager to see Endeavor, and Compress mentions how Toga was trying to look for Deku and Uraraka back during the battle with the students at the villa, when they were trying to slow down Gigantomachia. So, since Deku is clearly in no shape to fight her, this is clearly setting up Toga versus Uraraka for the latter part of the arc. And what do you know? Almost immediately after this, they see Uravity and Froppy on the security feed that Skeptic has set up, and Toga goes off after them. And honestly, good. I think a more low-key, dialogue-based confrontation is just what the Doctor ordered. We've had a lot of high-stakes, hard-hitting, city-buster clashes. It's time for something a bit more subdued as a palate cleanser, whilst also getting a more underutilized character some spotlight and attention. We then get a cool little scene where Uraraka and Froppy team up to save some civilians, with Uraraka pulling Froppy, and the people wrapped up in her tongue, away from some falling debris launched by Gigantomachia's rampage. And it's at this point, as they're helping the civilians, that a very sus old woman comes out screaming for help and begging for the two of them to follow her to help her bedridden husband. Uraraka follows her, as she's determined to save as many people as she can, with Froppy staying behind with the others. And of course, this sus old woman turns out to be Toga, who runs inside the house, a house where she'd already murdered the original old woman, forcing Uraraka to follow her. And honestly, this scene was spooky. I was expecting a jump scare. Didn't really get one, which was nice, but it was still pretty creepy. It's one of those scenes that in an anime looks awesome, but in real life, oh my god, this would be the scariest shit ever. Dark house, known serial killer who's obsessed with you, waiting inside, you know that, a corpse in plain view. You can hear her voice coming from every direction. No thanks, I'm out of there. And on top of that, she's separated her from the main group, meaning backup is unlikely to come unless Froppy comes looking, but even then, she'd have to find the right house in the right amount of time. Nightmare scenario. And yeah, then she busts through the ceiling with a knife, landing on top of Uraraka and pinning her down and asking whether she wants to kill her. Uraraka replies that she can't believe that Toga would just kill somebody just to have the chance to ask her that, with Toga not really liking the use of the word just in this context either. I guess much like Deku didn't like Shigaraki calling all the violence unnecessary, as he felt it cheapened their sacrifice, Toga feels like Uraraka's trivializing what she asked her. And then Uraraka powers up into her badass martial arts mode and flips Toga off her before getting into her combat stance. And honestly, it's good to see her getting some spotlight. I'm quite excited to see more of this battle, but based on the preview, the main story thread we're going to be following is still going to be Gigantomachia arriving at the battle. And then on top of that, Darby unleashing his grand plan. And surely that's going to take the majority of that episode. And so yeah, I don't think this is going to be quite as spectacular or focused on really. And that's a shame. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Great episode. This arc's a banger, eager for more. And the preview looks fire. What more can you want at this stage? But anyway, as always, these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? You like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.